Of the year, the first show or the end of last year when we did, you did this is one of the major themes which you just spoke about a few minutes ago as well. That 2016 was going to be a very volatile year, and it certainly is shaping up to be that so far into 3 months into the year. And there's no reason to expect that things are going to now stabilize and it's going to be, all wine and roses from here on in. I think it's going to get more volatile, and there will be more disturbances in the force, so to speak, as the year progresses.
Yeah, well, we have lots of surprises still to come. And one of the big change agents out there is the war footing, the war theaters.
Yeah, let's talk about Syria and Russia and all this war, Turkey, what's happening there, and geopolitics in general. So what enlighten us, please.
Well, I don't have all the answers, not at all, but there's a lot of pressure in Ukraine right now, which has been out of the news for a long time.
For a year now.
Yeah, well, several months ago, I don't know exactly, but 6, 8, 10 months ago, there was a lot of talk about the Minsk agreement.
Right.
And then the Minsk, the second Minsk agreement, they call it M2A. And it was an agreement forged by Russia and Germany and the United States. And very curiously, Ukraine was not represented in it.
So it was an agreement on Ukraine without Ukraine.
Yeah, they might have had some little puppet guy in there, but he was sent to go there and watch and take some notes and nod his head.
Right.
And now if you look at the Minsk II agreement, you see that the violations are almost uniformly on the Kiev-Ukraine side. No violations from Russia. Germany is fully with a handshake with the Russians that all is well on our party's side. And it's becoming a little bit more clear as time passes that the controlling arms in Ukraine are from the United States and Israel. They occupy most of the minister posts.
Right.
And the parliament in Ukraine is very angry that their gold, which was removed by the New York Fed thugs in March of 2014, that the Ukraine gold has not been returned.
Sorry, I got
Parliament. The parliament in Ukraine is upset that their gold has not been returned in 2 years. I said as soon as it was removed that they'll never see it again. But the New York Fed said that they're going to put it in safekeeping because it's a unstable zone. Okay, enough about Ukraine. The big issue right now is Turkey. And Desh, I don't have a lot of firm notes in front of my face regarding Turkey, but here's some of my bigger impressions. When Russia came in to clean out the strongholds of ISIS within Syria and maybe a little bit of northern Iraq, and maybe Kurdistan, which is also northern Iraq, but on the eastern side. When Russia came in, what they did was they exposed how ISIS was a project by the U.S., British, and Israeli security agencies. And there was a very important event that took place at the September G20 meeting. Putin came in, and before the formal meetings took place, he said, "We got a little preliminary PowerPoint show for anyone who wants to come over into this audience and check it out." And his PowerPoint show was a very detailed description with flowcharts of how the funding for ISIS all came from the Swiss banks with connections to the US, the British, and the Israeli security agencies. In other words, he exposed ISIS as being an Anglo-American Israeli terrorist project. Okay, so then you had the Turkish president get exposed, his son exposed for black market trafficking of stolen oil. And, Western readers read this and they don't have any idea what's going on. Where did the stolen oil come from? Well, it came from ISIS raiding the Iraqi oil fields.
Right.
Kurdistan is loaded with oil. Kirkuk in Kurdistan, in the northeast sector of Iraq, is loaded with oil. ISIS came in there, basically took over several oil fields and started selling oil on the black market. I actually have a client who works in Wall Street, and he told me this back in December. He said, "Jim, you need to be aware. Wall Street firms are brokering stolen oil for ISIS." And I said, "Well, that makes perfect sense. I mean, it's got the Langley connection." And he said, "Yes." And they're brokering it at $20. So they're selling it at a price. If they sell it for $30, they make $10 per barrel. So the stolen oil in ISIS from northern Iraq is a profit center for Wall Street banks. And whatever Wall Street does, so do the London banks. They work together. They're Mutt and Jeff. They're just two sides of the same coin. They're two rooms in the same building.
Right.
So the son of President Erdogan, I mean, I'm told that I mispronounced the name, but I'll just pronounce it how it looks in English, Erdogan. I hear it's Erdogan or something like that, Erdogan. Anyway, the president of Turkey has had his son implicated as being a very big black marketer, not just in oil, but in arms and probably narcotics. Shortly after Russia came in and disrupted this whole ISIS game in Iraq, Syria, you had an arrest of a Saudi prince in Beirut with 23 boxes full of heroin. And I thought, okay, they interrupted the payroll stream for ISIS because ISIS is paid in narcotics. The unit of payment, the money unit for ISIS guerrillas is narcotics. It's heroin. So then you got a lot of friction between Russia and Turkey because Turkey shut down a Russian fighter jet that was on a mission to bomb some ISIS strongholds.
Right.
When I say ISIS stronghold, it's very possible that they were Turkish. And for Americans who don't know what's going on, the U.S. Embassy in Ankara, Turkey, is the field operations point for ISIS, run by Langley and the Mossad. We're abusing another embassy, this one in Turkey, like we abused the Libyan embassy, which was used as an arms dealer depot, transit point for moving arms through Egypt to Syria. And Ambassador Stevens got in the way,
Right.
and Hillary Clinton saw to it that he was killed. You can call it treason, you could call it second-degree murder, you can call it conspiracy, you can call it anything, but in doing so, Hillary earned herself the right to run for president. Okay, so a lot is going on with Turkey. The Russians decided, okay, we're going to eliminate the tourists from entering Turkey, and now the coastline hotels in Turkey are 90% vacant. And that's just one of several industries in Turkey that's a mess. Okay, now there's more. The U.S. had a, oh gosh, we sent the guy with the reconstructed jaw. What's his name? Oh yeah, Kerry. Secretary of State Kerry was sent to the Kremlin with his tail between his legs, and he contradicted the longstanding Obama statement that we will never permit Assad to remain as president or leader or king or whatever he's called, I don't care, of Syria. So Kerry announced that we're reversing that position. Not only that, but Kerry announced that he was going to be putting pressure through the U.S. government offices, officially, on Turkey to get their troops out of Syria. And Syria said, F you, we're not doing that. They gave them the bird and said, we're not interested in your orders, we're doing what we want to do. It got a lot more hairy because the Germans and the French began working closely with the Russian military to clean out the terrorists operating under ISIS flags. And this is not simple because there are about 4 or 5 different groups operating. And for those who are not very familiar, it's impossible to tell who's who. And the U.S. likes to say, well, our U.S. military attacked a stronghold, ISIS stronghold in Syria, and we've eradicated some of their depots. No, they didn't. They blew up a bridge and electricity generating station in order to cripple the Syrian economy. So a lot of the U.S. news about U.S.-based news about what the U.S. military is doing in Syria is all lies. Okay, so it got all hairy. Now what I believe is happening is the core to NATO is working closely with the Russian military, where Putin did something brilliant. He said, who's going to help me and Russia to clean out terrorist camps, trading routes, depots, money centers, and recruiting lines in Syria? Who's going to help in this noble cause? The French and the Germans stepped forward quickly, and the British did what they usually do, a cowardly secret action where they went to Paris and said, we will provide weapons and logistic support, but don't tell anybody. I don't care for British politicians any more than I do American politicians. I could go on for half an hour of what scum and lowlives they are. But so we have Putin attracting the core of NATO, France and Germany. There's no bigger core to NATO than France and Germany. You might get Italy and Spain joining a little bit, but that is not the core. That's not where the wealth, that's not where the power, that's not where the voice is. Okay, what about the fringe to NATO? Now you have the NATO nations in the last few weeks making overt, clear, explicit statements. We will not support you, Turkey, in further military actions in Syria. You're on your own. For a while, I was actually wondering if maybe the United States was setting up Turkey in order to ignite a wider war with Russia, so that there would be a war with Russia over Turkey and Ukraine and Syria. But now Putin has done an exit. I read a hilarious statistic the other day. Somebody has retrieved some data from official sources to the effect that the Russian military has spent $550 million in Syria on their activity in the last few months, and now they're starting to pull out. And they made a comparison. The same person who raised this made a comparison to the U.S. Pentagon budget. And they found a line item in the Pentagon budget that's hilarious. The U.S. spends approximately $1 billion a year on marching bands. Musical marching bands.
$1 billion.
They spend twice as much every year, not this year, every year. They spend twice as much money on marching bands compared to what Russia did in several months in Syria only. So who's got the spending problem, Russia or the United States? Well, how do you define problem? The Americans have no difficulty in funding our expenses because we print money to cover our deficits.
Right.
Desh, I got to explain something that is extremely important and powerful about geopolitical changes as they relate to military matters that has now finally come to the fore and has reached some of the press networks. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with Cato back in 2013. I was living in a certain building. He was nearby. We bumped into each other once in a while. And he sat me down and said, Jim, I want to explain something to you. It's kind of subtle, but very, very important. And you're going to become aware of this in the next couple of years. And he said, the United States really has two militaries. And I said, you mean like Pentagon and Langley? And he said, yeah, but let me explain. He said, the Pentagon has military, and it's paid by the taxpayers. I said, you mean it's paid by deficit? And he said, yeah, paid by deficits that are covered, right. And that's one side. I said, let's call them the Pentagon regulars. And he said, okay. But he said, but there's another side. It's Langley mercenaries. And I said, you mean like Blackwater? And he said, well, Blackwater is more like the set of generals. They're out there recruiting. Blackwater's in charge of, say, battalions. They enter the field with a Blackwater officer. Forget the rank. A leader, a chief on the field, is your Blackwater figure. And I said, well, who are they hiring? And he said, well, they're hiring a lot of Muslims. I said, you mean like Saudis? He said, well, it's a lot more than Saudis. They're hiring people from Eastern Europe who are of Muslim descent, who just want to, get a job and kill people for fun, kill people for hire. They make some money and kill. There's always a demand. You can always find people who would do that. I said, okay, what's the big issue then? And he said, there will come a day in the next couple of years when you will find on a given battlefield, on a certain theater of war, the Pentagon regulars on one side and the Langley mercenaries on the other. And I said, oh my gosh, so the U.S. versus the U.S. He said, in a sense, yes, but that's a stretch. It's more like the U.S. fighting its hired foreign mercenaries. I said, I understand. And I said, and these mercenaries are paid by narcotics, right, Cato? And he said, yes, exactly. So you've got taxpayer-funded regulars from the Pentagon versus narcotics-funded mercenaries from Langley and Mossad. And I said, well, what do you think the effect will be when this happens? And he said, the end of the U.S. government as you know it. I said, well, that's a pretty broad statement. What do you mean by that? He said, I don't know whether it's going to happen in the middle of Obama's second term or toward the end, but what it will force is significant structural changes in the high command for U.S. military activity, and maybe even some negotiated changes for White House leadership. I said, you're speaking in a lot of very nice terms, but are you talking about a military coup? And he said, possibly yes. I said, wow, this is pretty big. He said, yes, it may not happen for another year or two, but when it does, there are many high-ranking people in power who will not tolerate this. You cannot have the U.S. military-industrial complex fighting a war against itself because both sides are supplied by U.S. weapons makers, weapons firms, McDonnell Douglas, you know,
Right.
whatever.
Raytheon, all that. Yep.
Raytheon. I said, we're not talking about, you know, high sophisticated missiles and all this. No, we're talking about basic guns, grenades, tanks, RPGs, you know, rocket-propelled grenades. You cannot have the Pentagon fighting the Langley side. That's Washington versus Langley. You can't do that. I said, well, they can, but they're going to create a lot of disruption. He said, yes, but there are forces in place right now that if that ever happens, they pull the plug on the leadership as being out of control. I said, okay. I pointed out in my hat-trick letter back in December or so that we were seeing evidence of exactly this phenomenon. The U.S. military going in there making strikes against ISIS strongholds, which were basically Langley provided, Langley funded, Langley organized, and Langley supplied with weapons. So the Pentagon was killing the Langley mercenaries in December, and I pointed it out. Now I've gotten about 5 emails from clients in just the last week pointing out alternative media reports, articles of precisely this point. We're in a chaotic situation where the Pentagon is now at hot war with Langley mercenaries.
Does Langley control the White House?
Pardon me?
Does Langley control the White House?
Well, of course, ever since Papa Bush. Ever since Papa Bush, we've had the narcotics presidency.
Is that why Obama removed a lot of the generals and admirals and, you know, a lot of the top brass of the Air Force and stuff? A lot of those guys have been dismissed under his command.
Obama's not the first. It started with Clinton in 1992. So we've had 23 years of purging of the U.S. military high command. Clinton.
There's going to be a lot of pissed off people, like, you know, in the upper echelons of the Defense Department, the Pentagon, I would say.
Well, depends on whether you're talking about active generals or retired generals.
Yeah, I mean retired, and I'm sure there must be some active ones as well.
Well, yeah, but the retired ones don't command anything except their own retirement check. Okay, let me explain something. There was terminology that developed during the Clinton administration, 8 years of purging. They called them loyalists versus constitutionalists. The constitutionalist general or admiral was a man or woman who believed that they were upholding the Constitution in the name of the people. Okay, those people were dismissed. The other side is the loyalists. It's like loyal to the king, the king of narcotics.
Right.
The loyalists are the narco side. And they all elevated in their positions, and unfortunately, quite a few are Satanists. I'm told by one source of mine that all 5 Joint Chiefs are Satanists. And I said, well, I hope you're wrong. We may never find out. Okay, then came Bush 2 and his 8 years, and he had numerous dismissals and forced retirement of more generals and more admirals. Now you have 8 more years of the 3rd narcotics president. Well, that's actually the 4th. Papa Bush, followed by Clinton, followed by Baby Bush, followed by Obama. You've got 7 terms. 28 years of narcotic presidencies in the United States. Obama has actually dismissed as many as his predecessors. Now, I've been told that there are 500 generals and admirals that have been forced into retirement. One of the most recent got some publicity, a woman named Admiral Rice. Admiral Rice refused to hand over to Obama launch codes for nuclear weapons. The Pentagon, white hats, the good folks, put in a protective measure within the nuclear arsenal to put one more layer between the president and the button. And the president does not like it. So they forced Admiral Rice into retirement. I'm told that there are 500. 500. And they've organized. I don't want to go into the beginning of their movement. It happened in 1995. Just look up Oklahoma City. These 500 admirals and generals, well, predominantly generals, have organized something called America First. America First is basically the constitutionalists making their statement, slamming the table. We will install the Constitution once again. Well, wait a minute, isn't the Constitution in force now? No, it's not. The Patriot Act marginalized the Constitution. I laugh every time the Supreme Court makes a statement where they quote the Constitution. It was marginalized by the Patriot Act. They should be quoting the Patriot Act. And recently they have done just that by giving continued permission of the police force across the United States to seize any and all cash they come in contact with, like with stopped automobiles.
Yes.
Oh, I tell you, Desh, there were 1,600 incidents in 2015 of police stealing citizens' money roadside. And I actually have a client who knows someone who had a good deal of money stolen. I said, how much? He said, well, several $100s. I said, what do they say? This, under the Patriot Act and anti-terrorism, we are seizing this money. Gosh. I mean, I wonder where it goes. You know, they seize the money, they steal it. Where does it go? Is it like Latin America, where it goes into the policeman's pockets as supplementary income? My guess is that it goes into a special fund with the name of George Bush family on it. So that's the phenomenon that Cato explained, and we're in this now firmly. There are some congressional members who are aghast that the U.S. military machine is at war with itself. It's chaos. I mean, can you imagine you've got a big family and you've got son number 1 fighting son number 7, who's a bit wayward, and they're killing each other. What does Dad have to say about this? Well, unfortunately, Dad is working with the dark sheep, the black sheep of the family. So I don't know how this is going to turn out. I just don't know. I think we're going to start seeing some deals where the president has to comply with certain rules, and we're going to be asking the question, who's in charge?